Picture this: you're stepping into the heart of ancient Rome, where the cobblestone streets hum with the energy of 1,000 voices. The air is thick with the scent of smoky grilled meats, warm flatbreads fresh off the clay ovens, and sweet honey-drenched pastries. Around every corner, vendors call out to passers-by, their stalls overflowing with dishes that don't just feed the body, but weave the very fabric of daily life. This wasn't just about grabbing a quick meal. It was where politics were debated, friendships forged, and cultures collided. These street food vendors were the unsung architects of urban survival, turning simple meals into the glue that held entire civilizations together. What if I told you that the food cart you pass on your way to work today has roots stretching back thousands of years? That the humble act of sharing a meal on the go once shaped empires, fueled revolutions, and even decided the fates of cities. From the smoky grills of Pompeii to the spice-laden alleys of ancient Baghdad, street food was more than sustenance. It was a powerful force that dictated who thrived and who struggled in the crowded, chaotic world of ancient urban centers. These vendors didn't just sell food. They were the pulse of the city, the keepers of tradition, and sometimes the quiet revolutionaries who fed the voices of change. So how did these everyday cooks leave such an indelible mark on history? How did a simple bowl of stew or a skewer of roasted meat become a catalyst for social connection, economic innovation, and even political upheaval? That's the story we're about to unravel, one sizzling pan, one bustling marketplace at a time. Together, we'll trace the footsteps of these ancient vendors, uncovering how their flavors shaped cultures, their ingenuity transformed economies, and their resilience carved out a space for ordinary people in the grand tapestry of history. This isn't just a journey into the past, it's a reminder that the food we share on the streets today carries echoes of a legacy thousands of years in the making. Get ready to see your favorite street snacks in a whole new light. To understand why street food became such a powerful force in ancient cities, we have to travel back to the dusty riverbanks of Mesopotamia, where civilization itself was taking its first steps. Imagine the sun beating down on workers hauling bricks for ziggurats or merchants haggling in crowded bazaars. These people didn't have time to return home for meals, and that's where the earliest street vendors stepped in. They offered portable, hearty dishes, roasted barley pressed into cakes, skewers of river fish charred over open flames, even simple stews ladled into clay bowls. This wasn't just food, it was fuel for the engines of urban growth. What's fascinating is how quickly these vendors became woven into the fabric of city life. Archaeologists have found evidence of food stalls clustered near the great temples of Ur, suggesting even priests and scribes relied on them between rituals. Near construction sites, vendors adapted their menus to workers' tastes, adding spices to mask the grit of flour ground by hand or serving fermented drinks to dull the ache of labor. And in markets, they acted as early social hubs, places where gossip was traded as eagerly as coins. But street food's rise wasn't just about practicality. It was also a quiet revolution in who controlled nourishment. For the first time, people could eat without depending on household kitchens or aristocratic feasts. A laborer with a few copper coins could share a meal with a merchant, blurring social lines one bite at a time. Even the ingredients told a story. Vendors used whatever was cheap and local, from Nile catfish in Egypt to chickpeas in the Indus Valley, creating flavors that became signatures of their cities. These humble beginnings set a pattern that would repeat across history. Whether in Rome's Tabernae or along the Silk Road, street vendors kept cities moving by turning scarcity into ingenuity. They didn't just feed mouths, they shaped identities, sparked innovations, and proved that a meal eaten standing up could be as powerful as any banquet. The streets of ancient Rome weren't just paved with stone, they were paved with opportunity for anyone who knew how to work a griddle. Step into the shadow of the Colosseum, and you'd find rows of Thermopolia, the world's first fast food joints, their counters sunken into marble tops with circular holes for steaming pots of stew. These weren't just food stalls, they were the Roman equivalent of a modern food court, serving piping hot meals to workers who couldn't afford kitchens in their cramped insulae apartments. The menu, a far cry from today's burgers and fries. Imagine thick, steaming poles, a porridge made from spelt wheat that could be topped with anything from honey to leftover meat, or flatbread smeared with that notorious Roman obsession, garum. This fermented fish sauce was the ketchup of antiquity, adding a salty punch to every dish from eggs to fruit. What made these stalls revolutionary wasn't just their speed, but who they served. At lunch hour, you might see a senator's slave jostling elbows with a merchant's apprentice, both dipping bread into the same pot of lentils. The wealthy might sneer at these common eateries in public, but archaeologists have found evidence that even elite households regularly sent servants to fetch takeaway from Thermopolia. This was one of the few places where Rome's rigid social hierarchy softened, if only for the time it took to slurp down a bowl of soup. Location was everything. The most successful vendors clustered along the Via Sacra, Rome's main thoroughfare, where foot traffic was constant. Their stalls became stages for the drama of daily life, politicians stopping to gauge public opinion, lawyers grabbing a quick bite between court cases, even gladiators carb loading before matches. Some vendors grew famous for their specialties, like the ones near the baths known for selling spiced wine to bathers. Others adapted to their clientele, offering vegetarian options near temples where meat was forbidden. The real genius of Roman street food lay in its logistics. Amphorae filled with olive oil from Hispania, grain shipments from Egypt, and garum from Pompeii turned these humble stalls into nodes of a vast trade network. When Mount Vesuvius erupted, it preserved a thermopolium in Pompeii with traces of 2,000-year-old duck, goat, and snail stews still in their pots, proof that this wasn't just subsistence eating, but cuisine with regional flair. The echoes are unmistakable, the same hustle, the same melting pot flavors, the same need for quick, affordable meals that fuel a city on the go. Some innovations never go out of style. While Rome's Thermopolia buzzed with the energy of a thriving empire, over 1,000 years earlier along the Nile, an even more astonishing street food economy was keeping one of history's most ambitious projects alive. The pyramid builders of Giza weren't just fed. They were paid in bread and beer, with street vendors acting as the ancient world's most critical payroll system. Imagine the scene. Beneath the blistering Egyptian sun, crews of 20,000 workers needed enough calories to haul 2-ton limestone blocks, and that's where the humble bread seller stepped into history's spotlight. These weren't just any loaves. Archaeological evidence from workers' settlements reveals bread so coarse it left traces of sand and millstone grit in skeletons' teeth, proof that speed and calorie count trumped refinement. Vendors near construction sites perfected dense, portable flatbreads that could survive hours in the heat, often flavored with dates or figs for quick energy. But the real genius was the pairing with beer, not the frothy drink we know today, but a thick, porridge-like brew packed with nutrients. Workers received daily rations of both, with records showing 3 loaves and 2 jugs per man as standard payment. Tomb paintings at Deir el Medina vividly depict these transactions, showing bakers rolling dough in outdoor courtyards while scribes tallied distributions on clay tablets. What's remarkable is how these vendors became embedded in Egypt's bureaucratic machine. The state tightly controlled grain supplies, meaning every bread seller was effectively a government contractor. Excavations at the Height El Ghurab site uncovered entire bakery districts with industrial-scale operations, some ovens large enough to fire hundreds of loaves simultaneously. Yet even within this system, vendors found ways to innovate. Some mixed in extra yeast for lighter bread, while others traded their surplus for spices to create premium offerings. A worker with extra copper rings might upgrade to bread sweetened with honey or studded with nuts, creating Egypt's earliest version of a meal deal. These vendors did more than fill stomachs. They enabled a logistical miracle. Without this mobile, efficient food network, the pyramids would have crumbled before they rose. Modern calculations suggest feeding the workforce required 60,000 kilograms of grain daily, the equivalent of covering a football field knee-deep in flour every week. That all moved through the hands of bakers and brewers who turned grain into fuel with relentless efficiency. Their legacy endures in the most literal sense. Chemical analysis of pyramid mortar found traces of beer and bread particles, suggesting workers even used their rations as binding agents when water was scarce. From payroll to pyramid core, street food didn't just support ancient Egypt's greatest achievement, it became part of their very fabric. Athens' Agora wasn't just a marketplace, it was a simmering cauldron of ideas where the scent of sizzling lamb mingled with the heat of philosophical debate. Picture Socrates perched on a stone bench, peeling charred meat off a wooden skewer as he posed probing questions about justice to wide-eyed students. Nearby, a vendor pressed olives into clay cups, their briny tang cutting through the dust of animated conversations. This was street food at its most transformative, where a handful of figs or a sip of resin-thickened wine could sustain hours of discourse that shaped Western thought. The brilliance of Athenian vendors lay in their adaptability. They positioned their stalls like chess pieces around the open square, fruit sellers near the law courts where juries needed quick energy, wine merchants beside the stoa where philosophers held court. Archaeologists have found remnants of tiny grills no wider than a handspan, evidence of vendors who could pack up and follow the crowds when debates spilled beyond the agora's borders. Some even specialized in thinking foods like walnuts and raisins, believed to sharpen the mind, an ancient version of brain-boosting snacks for intellectuals on the go. What made this exchange revolutionary was its accessibility. For the price of a few obols, a fishmonger could listen to Plato dissecting virtue while nibbling salted anchovies. The wealthy might retreat to private symposia, but the Agora's street food created a rare democratic space where wisdom wasn't served on silver platters, but on rough wooden plates passed hand to hand. Even the ingredients told a story of cultural fusion. Sesame cakes from Persia, spiced sausages from Thessaly, and Thracian cheese pies all sharing space on makeshift counters, mirroring Athens' role as a crossroads of ideas. The real legacy of these vendors wasn't just in feeding bodies, but in shaping history's trajectory. When Diogenes famously ate lentils in the marketplace to mock Plato's abstractions, he did so from a vendor's bowl. That simple meal became a philosophical statement, proving street food could be as subversive as any treatise. Today's food trucks serving fusion tacos near university campuses owe more to these ancient Greek vendors than they might realize, still feeding hungry minds one portable bite at a time. While the Mediterranean world bustled with its own street food traditions, halfway across the globe, China's Tang Dynasty was perfecting an entirely different kind of culinary revolution under the glow of paper lanterns. As dusk fell over Chang'an, One of the largest cities on Earth at the time, the night market sprang to life with a spectacle of sizzling woks and steaming baskets. Vendors didn't just feed the masses, they invented entirely new ways to cook, turning simple ingredients into culinary marvels that would echo through centuries. Picture the scene: scholars debating poetry over bowls of hand-pulled noodles, merchants haggling for spice-laden lamb skewers, and performers twirling between stalls where the sharp scent of ginger and star anise hung thick in the air. What set these night markets apart was their sheer innovation. Street cooks faced relentless demand in crowded cities where home kitchens were scarce, leading to breakthroughs that changed global cuisine forever. The stir-fry, that iconic quick-fire dance of ingredients in a searing wok, was born from necessity, allowing vendors to cook fast with minimal fuel. Dumplings evolved into portable masterpieces, their fillings reflecting regional flavors from Sichuan's fiery peppers to the delicate seafood of coastal provinces. Even noodles took on new life, with vendors stretching and slapping dough into impossibly thin strands right before customers' eyes, turning meal preparation into street theater. But the true magic of these markets lay in their role as social equalizers. For a few copper coins, a farmer fresh from the fields could share a bench with a government clerk, both dipping into the same communal pot of hot pot broth. Performers and storytellers circled food stalls, spinning tales between bites of crispy spring rolls. The markets became such cultural hubs that officials posted edicts trying, and largely failing, to curb their late-night revelry. Even the imperial court couldn't resist, with records showing palace servants regularly sneaking out to bring back skewers of honey-glazed meats for bored concubines. The legacy of Tang Dynasty street vendors isn't just preserved in museums. It's alive in every bustling night market from Taipei to Bangkok. That sizzle of garlic hitting oil, the rhythmic chopping of cleavers, the way steam rises from bamboo baskets at midnight. These are direct descendants of a culinary revolution that turned necessity into artistry. When you bite into a juicy xiaolong bao today, you're tasting 1,000 years of street vendor ingenuity, one perfectly folded pleat at a time. The Silk Road wasn't just a ribbon of trade routes, it was a living, breathing corridor where sizzling grills and spice-laden dishes turned strangers into neighbors. Imagine a caravan stopping for the night in Samarkand, weary travelers drawn by the smoky perfume of lamb roasting on vertical spits. Persian merchants would haggle over saffron-infused rice with Chinese silk traders, both swapping stories between bites of bread baked in tandoor ovens. This was globalization served on a skewer, where every meal became a quiet revolution in cultural exchange. What made these street vendors extraordinary was their role as accidental diplomats. A single dish could tell the story of an entire journey. Take the humble kebab, which began as shishlik in Central Asia before Persian cooks added sumac. Then Indian traders introduced turmeric, creating layers of flavor that mirrored the route itself. Flatbreads evolved just as dramatically, from the sesame-studded naan of Persia to the scallion-layered kong yu bing of China, each adaptation reflecting local tastes while preserving the essence of the original. Archaeologists have found pepper residue in 2,000-year-old cooking pots from Xinjiang, proof that spices traveled faster than empires could conquer, carried not by armies but by vendors who knew hunger had no borders. The real magic happened at crossroads cities like Kashgar, where vendors became masters of fusion cuisine centuries before the term existed. Uyghur cooks blended Chinese wheat noodles with Central Asian lamb broth, creating lagman noodles that still define the region's cuisine today. In caravanserais, portable clay ovens allowed bakers to recreate hometown specialties anywhere, turning simple stops into culinary time capsules. Some dishes traveled so well they became universal. Dumplings appeared from Turkey to Korea, their fillings changing but their comforting essence remaining constant. These vendors did more than adapt recipes, they rewrote culinary maps. When a Tang Dynasty poet wrote of Western cakes sold in Chang'an markets, he was describing Persian desserts adopted as Chinese street snacks. The chili pepper's journey from Mesoamerica to Sichuan's fiery kitchens might have taken centuries, but it was street vendors who finally tossed them into woks, sparking a flavor revolution. Even today, when you bite into a shawarma or savor the crackle of freshly baked naan, you're tasting the legacy of those Silk Road entrepreneurs who knew that breaking bread was the surest way to build bridges. In the shadow of soaring Gothic cathedrals, medieval Europe's streets pulsed with a different kind of devotion, the daily pilgrimage to pie stalls and ale carts. Picture the scene, frosty mornings in London's Cheapside, where the clatter of wooden trenchers mingled with the cries of hot pies, as vendors lifted steaming lids to reveal golden-crusted wonders. These weren't just meals, they were edible survival kits packed with whatever ingredients could be scavenged: pigeon, eel, even leftover grains thickened into hearty fillings that stuck to ribs through long hours of labor. The cleverest bakers crafted pastry, coffins with walls so thick they doubled as disposable bowls for workers who couldn't afford proper dishes. Alewives, those formidable women who dominated the brewing trade, became unsung heroines of medieval nutrition. Their stalls offered more than just drink. They provided liquid calories in an era when contaminated water made beer safer to consume than most well water. Archaeologists analyzing medieval bones have found evidence that even children consumed weak, small beer, proving how deeply these vendors were woven into daily survival. The best alewives became neighborhood institutions, recognizable by the broomsticks they mounted outside their doors, a precursor to today's pub signs. And their stalls evolved into early newsrooms where gossip about royal scandals spread as fast as recipes for curing hangovers. What's astonishing is how these humble vendors shaped European culture in ways we still recognize. The pie seller's cry of "Who gives a penny?" became the first fixed-price system in chaotic markets, laying groundwork for modern retail. Alehouses gradually morphed into coaching inns, then pubs, preserving that tradition of communal gathering over shared sustenance. Even the Great Plague couldn't erase their legacy. Records show pie sellers were among the first businesses to reopen after outbreaks, feeding survivors with cheap, nourishing meals when entire households had been wiped out. The real revolution happened in public squares, where food stalls became stages for medieval life. Near York Minster, vendors sold letuary of snails to pilgrims seeking miracle cures, while in Paris, roasted chestnut carts warmed the hands of scholars debating outside the Sorbonne. Some sellers grew notorious, like the London pie man convicted of using cat meat, whose punishment involved being paraded through streets with his fraudulent pies tied around his neck. These stories weren't just cautionary tales, they proved how central street food had become to urban identity. When you bite into a modern pork pie or sip a craft ale today, you're tasting the stubborn resilience of those medieval vendors who turned scarcity into community, one hot crust at a time. Beneath the towering pyramids of Tenochtitlan, a marketplace thrived with such dizzying abundance that Spanish conquistadors swore it rivaled the grandest squares of Seville or Constantinople. Bernal Diaz del Castillo, a soldier under Cortés, wrote of stalls piled high with golden maize cakes, baskets of iridescent hummingbird feathers, and live turtles ready for the pot. But what truly stunned the Europeans were the vendors turning cacao beans into liquid gold. These weren't just snacks, they were transactions, rituals, and power plays, all served in a single ceramic cup. The chocolate sellers of Tenochtitlan operated at the crossroads of commerce and cosmology. Cacao beans served as currency. A single bean could buy a ripe avocado. 30 might purchase a rabbit, yet street vendors transformed this money into frothy, bitter drinks spiced with vanilla, chili, or the crimson dye of cochineal insects. Unlike today's sweet confections, this was an acquired taste, reserved for nobles, warriors, and merchants who could afford the luxury. Archaeologists have found evidence that vendors meticulously controlled the foam, pouring the drink from height to create a bubbly crown believed to hold spiritual significance. The act of drinking chocolate became so entwined with status that the Aztec ruler Moctezuma allegedly consumed 50 golden cups daily, served by attendants who followed him like human cacao dispensers. Yet the real genius of these markets lay in their democratization of exotic ingredients. While elites sipped chocolate, commoners fueled their days with protein-packed street foods that would make modern foodies pause: roasted grasshoppers dusted with lime, ant eggs scooped like caviar, or salamanders skewered on cactus spines. Vendors near the causeway specialized in portable foods for canoe paddlers and messengers: tamales wrapped in corn husks, squash blossom quesadillas, even fermented agave worms packed for long journeys. The sheer variety spoke to an empire that stretched from coast to jungle, with tribute systems ensuring that coastal fish and tropical fruits appeared in highland markets within days. What made these vendors indispensable wasn't just their wares, but their role as human algorithms in a pre-digital economy. Without scales or written records, they mentally calculated exchanges between cacao beans, cotton cloaks, and copper axes, maintaining a barter system so precise that Spanish invaders adopted it temporarily. Their stalls became early stock markets, where the price of chili peppers might fluctuate based on rumors of frost in distant growing regions. When Cortés first entered Tenochtitlan, he reportedly saw a single vendor selling sandals next to another offering jade masks, a tangible manifestation of an economy where food, finery, and function held equal value. The market's collapse after Spanish conquest reveals their true importance, as missionaries destroyed pagan foods like amaranth and banned chocolate rituals. Famine ravaged communities stripped of their culinary infrastructure. Surviving codices show vendors secretly passing cacao beans to resistance leaders, turning street food into silent rebellion. Today, when you bite into a oaxacan grasshopper taco or sip mole thickened with chocolate, you're tasting fragments of a system that once fed an empire, one ingenious vendor at a time. A steaming bowl of lentil stew in ancient Rome told a story far deeper than hunger. It whispered secrets of status, shame, and survival. While the wealthy reclined in villas feasting on stuffed dormice and peacock tongues, the working classes devoured cheap, hearty street fare like lukaniki sausages, greasy links of spiced pork that aristocrats openly mocked in writings yet secretly craved. Juvenal, the famed satirist, sneered at these reeking snacks even as his peers discreetly sent slaves to fetch them. This culinary double standard reveals street food's paradoxical role. It fed the masses but also marked them, turning meal choices into edible class signifiers. Nowhere were these divides more rigid than in India's caste-bound streets, where the very act of handing food across social lines could spark outrage. Brahmin priests avoided vendors serving onion-laden dishes believed to inflame passions, while lower caste workers relied on protein-packed street snacks like spiced vada or steamed idli to sustain brutal labor. Astonishingly, some vendors developed ingenious workarounds: leaf-wrapped parcels that prevented polluting touch, or sweets made from pure ingredients like jaggery and coconut that all castes could share. In Madurais temple corridors, archaeologists have found traces of ancient food stalls strategically positioned to serve pilgrims without breaching sacred spaces, proving necessity could sometimes soften even the hardest social barriers. Yet street vendors weren't just passive witnesses to these divides, they were masterful navigators of them. In Ottoman Istanbul, simit sellers near mosques offered sesame-crusted bread rings to rich and poor alike, but the wealthy received theirs wrapped in silk-lined boxes. Edo period Japan saw tempura stalls catering to samurai who disdained fried food as barbarian, yet couldn't resist the aroma of shrimp crisping in sesame oil. Even the ingredients spoke volumes. In Renaissance Florence, tripe vendors served humble offal to laborers but added precious saffron for bankers stopping by after work, creating a two-tiered menu on a single cart. The most fascinating twist, how often these boundaries blurred when no one was looking. Excavations at Pompeii's Thermopolia revealed traces of expensive spices like pepper in supposedly plebeian dishes, suggesting some vendors quietly upgraded meals for regulars who could pay extra. Mughal-era paintings show nobles disguised as commoners to enjoy the vibrant street food of Delhi's Chandni Chowk, lured by flavors no palace kitchen could replicate. Perhaps that's street food's ultimate subversion. It created shadow economies where a coin could momentarily erase privilege, and where a shared love of flavor sometimes trumped the strictest social rules. The proof lingers in recipes passed down through generations, each bite carrying echoes of those who ate standing up, breaking bread and barriers in equal measure. In the ash-preserved ruins of Pompeii, archaeologists uncovered something revolutionary. Hidden in plain sight, charred remains of food stalls with inscriptions bearing women's names. This wasn't just ancient fast food. It was a rare economic foothold for women in a society that otherwise confined them to domestic roles. Take the case of one Aelia, whose thermopolium near the amphitheater still had traces of her signature fish sauce in its jars. With no access to formal loans or property rights, she and others like her transformed sidewalk corners into thriving enterprises, using nothing more than a brazier, a few clay pots, and word-of-mouth marketing. Their menus were masterclasses in resourcefulness. Leftover grain became porridge. Yesterday's fish got a spicy garum glaze, and overripe fruit turned into sweet wine reductions. The same entrepreneurial spirit burned bright in the bustling ports of the ancient world. Freed slaves in Rome's Ostia district turned their knowledge of foreign spices into profitable ventures, selling pepper-laced stews to homesick sailors. In medieval Cairo, Jewish and Coptic women dominated the trade of fol medames, slow-cooked fava beans that fueled the city's laborers before sunrise. These vendors operated in the gray areas of formal economies, often skirting guild restrictions or sumptuary laws that tried to dictate who could sell what. A 9th-century Baghdad cookbook even records the story of a former concubine who bought her freedom by perfecting a sesame candy recipe, her stall eventually supplying the caliph's palace. What made street food the great equalizer was its low barrier to entry. No need for a brick-and-mortar shop when a folding table and a charcoal grill could become a livelihood. In Edo period Japan, impoverished samurai wives famously saved their families from ruin by selling soba noodles from roadside stands, their aristocratic upbringing lending an air of refinement to the humble dish. Similarly, enslaved African women in colonial Brazil turned ancestral cooking techniques into income, frying akara bean fritters in palm oil, a taste of home that became a currency of survival. The real innovation lay in their business models. Vendors in Constantinople's Byzantine markets pioneered subscription services where regulars could prepay for daily meals. Pompeii's Thermopolium owners offered loyalty discounts scratched onto clay tablets: buy 9 loaves, get the 10th free. These weren't just transactions, they were early forms of community trust building, a way for marginalized sellers to cement their place in the urban fabric. When you bite into a food truck taco or grab artisanal donuts from a pop-up today, you're tasting a legacy that stretches back to those first scrappy vendors who proved that flavor knows no social bounds and that a well-seasoned idea can rise from the streets to change the world. Imagine biting into a juicy mutton skewer in ancient Rome, only to realize too late that the meat had been dredged from the Tiber after 3 days in the sun. Street food in antiquity was a gamble, where today's regulations require health inspections and expiration dates. Vendors of the past operated in a dangerous gray zone between sustenance and sickness. The Romans weren't naive about these risks. Legal tablets from Pompeii reveal strict edicts against selling corruptum carnium, spoiled meat, with penalties ranging from steep fines to public floggings. Market overseers known as aediles patrolled the streets, armed with rudimentary testing methods, sometimes sniffing fish sauce batches for putrid odors or rubbing questionable meat on silver coins to check for sulfide reactions that indicated rot. Over in Tang Dynasty China, the stakes were even higher. Imperial food safety laws mandated that butchers selling tainted meat could face execution, while vendors caught diluting vinegar with water had their hands bound to their stalls for public shaming. Market inspectors wielded bamboo sticks to test the firmness of tofu and scrutinized tea leaves for mold under sunlight. Yet for all these measures, contamination remained rampant. Excavated latrines from Chang'an contained traces of parasitic worms, suggesting even the most vigilant diners regularly ingested more than they bargained for. The ingenuity of vendors in this high-risk environment was nothing short of remarkable. In Mesopotamia, brewers avoided poisoning customers by fermenting beer in vessels lined with bitumen, a natural antiseptic. Egyptian bakers added natron salt to bread not just for flavor, but to inhibit bacterial growth. Roman Thermopolium owners mastered the art of preservation through smoking, brining, and heavy spicing, though garam's extreme saltiness may have been less about taste and more about masking dubious ingredients. Some solutions were eerily modern. Han Dynasty ice houses stored perishables underground with insulating rice husks, while Persian caravan cooks buried yogurt in desert sands to keep it cool. What's fascinating is how these early struggles mirror today's street food debates. When archaeologists found a 2,000-year-old complaint letter in Egypt, a worker furious over being sold bread full of grit and weevils, it could easily be a modern Yelp review. The tension between regulation and accessibility hasn't changed. Heavy-handed enforcement could bankrupt small vendors, yet lax oversight risked public health. In Byzantium, authorities struck a balance by licensing trusted sausage makers with lead seals, while in medieval Paris, the Bakers' Guild enforced quality standards by dunking subpar loaves in the Seine as humiliation. Perhaps the most enduring lesson lies in the adaptability of both vendors and consumers. When excavations at Herculaneum revealed carbonized loaves stamped with bakers' names, it wasn't just vanity. It was early brand accountability, a way to trace contamination back to its source. Modern food trucks listing ingredient sources or vendors wearing gloves aren't so far removed from those ancient bakers marking their bread or Chinese tea sellers displaying cleanliness certificates. The risks may have evolved, but the dance between trust and survival remains unchanged, one cautious bite at a time. When Julius Caesar's legions marched across Gaul, their victories depended as much on grain merchants as on swords. Behind every column of armored soldiers trudged a ragtag caravan of vendors-bakers who could whip up portable hardtack biscuits in field ovens, and sausage sellers preserving meat in salt and animal intestines to withstand weeks on the road. These weren't just camp followers, they were the original military logistics corps, turning battlefields into impromptu marketplaces. Archaeologists digging near Roman siege camps have found remnants of these mobile kitchens' charred hearths spaced precisely at intervals matching the army's nightly stops, proof that hot meals were as strategically planned as troop formations. The Mongol Empire took this concept to terrifying efficiency. Genghis Khan's cavalry could traverse thousands of miles without supply trains because they mastered the art of survival eating. Dried mare's milk curds pressed into leathery sheets called arul provided quick protein that didn't spoil. When fresh meat was scarce, vendors accompanying the hordes would tenderize tough cuts by placing them under their saddles, letting hours of riding do the work of a mallet. But the real stroke of genius was their instant noodle precursor, sheets of dehydrated broth that could be dissolved in hot water to create nourishing soups within minutes. This wasn't just convenience, it was battlefield innovation that allowed the Mongols to outmaneuver slower, heavier armies. During sieges, street vendors transformed into underground resistance networks. When Constantinople was blockaded by Arab forces in the 7th century, fishermen turned their boats into floating bakeries, smuggling loaves through hidden sea channels. In medieval Paris, butchers dug tunnels to sneak cattle carcasses past English besiegers, while vendors near the walls devised ingenious signaling systems hanging specific vegetables from their stalls to indicate safe smuggling routes. The risks were immense. Records from the siege of Jerusalem describe vendors caught sneaking grain inside the walls being catapulted back into the city, encased in their own sacks as a warning. Refugee crises revealed street food's most profound humanitarian role. After the volcanic destruction of Thera in the Bronze Age, displaced Minoan vendors set up makeshift stalls along evacuation routes, feeding fleeing survivors with preserved figs and sesame cakes. Centuries later, during the 30 Years' War, German cities saw an explosion of flying kitchens, portable stalls serving cheap, calorie-dense foods like fried dough to waves of displaced peasants. These vendors often paid with their lives. Parish records from Strasbourg list multiple sausage sellers killed by marauding soldiers, their carts repurposed as barricades. The darkest chapters birthed unexpected innovations. World War I trench warfare gave rise to the trench pie, a sludge of bully beef, crushed biscuits, and melted chocolate that soldiers cooked in salvaged cans. Vendors near the front lines in WW2 perfected the art of the Blitz sandwich, layering whatever ingredients could be scavenged between slices of government-issued bread. Even in modern conflict zones from Syria to Sudan, the pattern holds wherever people are displaced. Street vendors materialize like culinary first responders, turning scraps into sustenance with stubborn resilience. What makes this legacy so poignant is its duality. The same hands that crafted delicate pastries in peacetime could improvise survival rations when cities crumbled. From Roman legionnaires gnawing on garum stuffed sausages to Ukrainian bakers keeping hearths burning during blackouts, street food has always been civilization's last line of defense against chaos. The next time you see a food truck parked near a construction site or disaster relief zone, remember, you're witnessing an ancient tradition that has fed armies, saved cities, and outlasted empires. In the bustling temple courtyards of ancient India, food vendors didn't just sell snacks, they became conduits of the divine. Every morning, priests would hand massive copper pots of steaming rice and lentils to waiting cooks, who transformed simple ingredients into prasadam, blessed food believed to carry the essence of the gods. These vendors operated on a sacred timetable, their stalls opening only after rituals concluded, their ladles moving in rhythm with temple bells. What made this system extraordinary was its accessibility. A wealthy merchant and a starving beggar received identical portions from the same communal pot, a rare moment where caste hierarchies dissolved in shared devotion. Archaeologists have found traces of turmeric and ghee preserved on thousand-year-old temple utensils, evidence of recipes unchanged for generations, passed down like whispered prayers. Across the Mediterranean, Greek butchers performed their own alchemy with sacrificial meats. After temple ceremonies dedicated to Zeus or Demeter, vendors near the altars would quickly portion out steaming cuts of sanctified animals, grilling them over olive wood fires. The smell alone drew crowds. Citizens believed eating these charred offerings granted them a literal taste of divine favor. Some stalls even specialized in specific gods. Those near Athena's temples sold honey-drizzled barley cakes shaped like owls, while Dionysian festivals featured vendors threading spiced goat meat onto vine wood skewers, the smoke curling like incense toward the heavens. But this sacred commerce wasn't without its controversies. Roman satirist Juvenal mocked wealthy matrons who bought leftover sacrificial meats at premium prices, believing it would cure their ailments. In Varanasi, Brahmin priests occasionally clashed with entrepreneurial vendors who repackaged prasadam into portable sweets for travelers, arguing it diluted the ritual's purity. Yet these tensions only underscored how deeply street food was woven into spiritual life, whether it was Mayan women selling cocoa drinks to pilgrims visiting Chichen Itza's sacred wells or Ethiopian bakers crafting honey bread for Timkat festival processions. The true magic lay in how these vendors bridged worlds. A Theban laborer saving coins all year could finally taste the same Olympian quality meat as his city's leaders during the Panathenaic festival. In Mughal India, Sufi shrines distributed fragrant biryani to all comers, their massive deg pots stirring with equal portions of spice and sanctity. Even today, when you bite into a mooncake during Mid-Autumn Festival or share matzah on Passover, you're participating in an ancient tradition where humble vendors turned every meal into communion and every bite into blessing. The cobblestone streets of medieval Europe didn't just smell of roasting chestnuts and spiced ale. They sang. Every vendor had a signature call, a rhythmic chant or melodic cry that cut through the din of crowded markets like a culinary lighthouse. In London, pie sellers perfected a two-note cadence, hot pies, that carried over the clatter of cartwheels, while Parisian onion soup vendors banged wooden spoons against copper pots in a metallic beat hungry workers could recognize from blocks away. These weren't random shouts, they were carefully crafted auditory brands designed to convey freshness, urgency, and sometimes even price. Archaeologists studying old market regulations in York found ordinances dictating exactly how many syllables bakers' cries could contain, proving these calls were as regulated as they were creative. Halfway across the world in Edo-era Japan, street sellers turned advertising into high art. Noodle vendors played delicate wooden flutes whose pentatonic scales signaled whether they carried soba or udon, while sweet potato sellers clapped hayashigi wooden blocks in patterns so distinct, households could identify their favorite seller by rhythm alone. The most sophisticated operated like foodie buskers. Tokorotan seaweed jelly vendors performed comedic songs about their wares, collecting tips in addition to sales. These sonic signatures became so ingrained in urban life that when the shogunate temporarily banned street cries in the 17th century, records show widespread complaints that cities had lost their flavor. The real genius of these early marketing tactics lay in their adaptability. In Istanbul's Grand Bazaar, simit bread sellers developed calls that changed with the time of day. Morning cries emphasized freshness, while evening versions hinted at discounts to clear inventory. Venetian fishmongers used exaggerated hand gestures alongside their cries, creating a hybrid language that deaf residents could interpret visually. Even the tools of the trade became instruments. Tunisian date sellers shook brass rattles filled with pebbles, a sound that still echoes in modern souks. Fast forward to today, and the legacy of these street cries thrives in unexpected ways. The jingle of an ice cream truck twisting through suburban streets. Direct descendant of the Belgian waffle seller's handbells, that viral taco truck tick-tock with the catchy slogan, a digital age reboot of the oyster seller's rhyming calls in Victorian London. What began as simple necessity, making your voice heard in a noisy world, evolved into a universal language of hunger and hustle, proving that the right melody can make a stomach rumble across centuries. From flute songs to foodie influencers, the art of the edible pitch remains timeless. The layout of ancient cities wasn't accidental. It was a carefully orchestrated symphony where street vendors played first chair. Walk through the ruins of Ostia Antiqua, Rome's ancient port, and you'll find Thermopolia built into the ground floors of apartment blocks, their counters facing the street like open arms welcoming hungry dockworkers. These weren't afterthoughts crammed into alleys. They were intentional fixtures, as vital to urban design as aqueducts or sewers. Roman engineers even accounted for vendor congestion in their blueprints, widening streets near amphitheaters to accommodate the surge of sausage sellers during games. Half a world away in Istanbul, the Ottomans took this integration further with their hand-system multi-story market complexes where vendors occupied arched niches surrounding central courtyards. The ground floors sizzled with skewered meats and simit bread ovens, while upper levels housed workshops and lodging. This vertical zoning created self-sustaining micro-neighborhoods where a leatherworker could grab breakfast without leaving the building, and merchants striking deals upstairs could summon trays of sweet lokum with a clap. The Hans weren't just buildings, they were ecosystems with food vendors acting as the metabolic engines that kept everything humming. Chinese urban planners elevated the concept with hutong alleyways, those narrow arteries where steaming baozi stalls naturally clustered near public wells, creating organic gathering points. Morning markets would erupt where hutongs intersected major thoroughfares, timed perfectly with the changing of night watchmen. The genius lay in their adaptability. During festivals, these same spaces transformed into open-air banquet halls, with vendors rearranging stalls to form communal tables under lantern light. What modern city councils often miss is how these ancient systems balanced order with spontaneity. Pompeii's stepping stones weren't just for crossing muddy streets, they guided foot traffic past food stalls in a carefully choreographed dance. The Aztecs designed causeways with periodic widening to allow canoe-based vendors to dock without blocking transport. Even the placement mattered. Mayan chocolate sellers always clustered near ball courts where spectators needed quick energy, while Byzantine fishmongers set up just inside city gates to catch farmers arriving with fresh produce. The real lesson lies in recognizing street food as urban glue. When Paris banned medieval pie sellers from bridges, they inadvertently created food deserts in bustling districts. Conversely, Edo-period Tokyo flourished because it designated specific blocks as yatai zones, where noodle stands could operate without bureaucratic hassle. These weren't quaint traditions, they were proven strategies for keeping cities nourished, connected, and alive. Perhaps today's planners scrolling through zoning maps should take a page from the past. The best cities don't just make room for people, but for the sizzle of skewers and the call of the bread seller echoing down centuries. The sausage seller in Aristophanes' comedy The Knights wasn't just a punchline, he was a mirror held up to Athenian society, greasy fingers and all. This bawdy character, who rises from hawking cheap meats to outwitting politicians, captured the paradox of street vendors, ridiculed for their grime yet admired for their grit. Across the ancient world, poets and painters couldn't resist putting these everyday merchants in the spotlight, revealing a love-hate relationship as old as cities themselves. In Rome, Martial penned scathing epigrams about fishmongers who watered down their garum, while Petronius Satiricon featured a freedman-turned-sausage king whose vulgar feast mocked elite pretensions. Even the graffiti of Pompeii joined in with crude sketches of vendors labeled thief or cheat next to heartfelt doodles of beloved bakers. Artists treated vendors with equal fascination. A 1st-century fresco from Herculaneum freezes a moment at a Roman Thermopolium, the proprietor's face etched with exhaustion as he serves a customer, his hands stained from decades of chopped herbs and spilled wine. The scene isn't idealized, it's raw and real, celebrating the weariness of labor. Egyptian tomb paintings took a different tack, depicting bread sellers with almost mathematical precision, their baskets stacked in perfect symmetry to ensure the deceased would have eternal sustenance. But perhaps the most poignant tribute comes from Song Dynasty China, where scrolls like Along the River during Qingming Festival immortalized noodle vendors mid-motion, their bamboo poles bending under the weight of dumpling baskets, ordinary heroes in an unfolding urban epic. The fishwife archetype proves how deeply ambivalence ran. From London to Constantinople, this loud, brash vendor became a stock character in plays and poems, her sharp tongue and sharper business sense simultaneously mocked and admired. Dutch Golden Age painters like Jan Steen turned her into a moral lesson, showing fish stalls as chaotic dens of vice where housewives might squander coins. Yet in Japan's ukiyo-e prints, the same archetype emerged as a symbol of resilience. Hokusai's waran and street vendor contrasts a courtesan's delicate beauty with a radish seller's windburn determination, neither idealized nor vilified. What these depictions share is an unflinching honesty. The vendors in 1001 Nights aren't exoticized, they're shrewd negotiators who know the true value of saffron. Chaucer's Canterbury Tales gives us the haberdasher and the cook, their calloused hands and questionable hygiene rendered without apology. Even religious art got in on the act. Medieval illuminated manuscripts often showed biblical scenes with anachronistic food stalls in the background, as if no holy moment was complete without the hum of commerce nearby. The true testament to their cultural impact lies in survival. While kings and philosophers faded from folk memory, the image of the bread seller, the kebab skewer, the tea pourer endured, not as caricatures but as constants. When a 17th-century Spanish still life paints a humble garlic vendor with the same reverence as a saint, or when Mughal miniatures frame a sherbet seller in gold leaf, they're making a quiet declaration. These are the people who keep the world turning, one transaction at a time. The next time you scroll past a meme about overpriced stadium hot dogs or chuckle at a cartoon taco truck, remember, you're participating in a tradition of irreverent homage that's been simmering for millennia. When Portuguese sailors first stepped onto Japanese shores in the 16th century, they brought more than muskets and Bibles. They carried a culinary revolution in their frying pans. The dish we now know as tempura, those ethereal golden fritters that define Japanese street food, actually began as peixinhos da horta, little fish from the garden, a Portuguese snack of green beans dipped in batter. Japanese vendors quickly adapted the technique, substituting local seafood and perfecting the art of quick frying in sesame oil. This wasn't just cultural exchange, it was edible colonization, where foreign ingredients and methods seeped into daily life through the sizzle of street stalls. The Columbian exchange turned street food into a living atlas of empire. Before Spanish galleons crisscrossed the Pacific, Thai cuisine had never known the fire of chili peppers, and Italian vendors sold tomato-less ketchup made from mushrooms or walnuts. Imagine the shock of Chinese market-goers encountering their first ear of maize from the Americas, or the thrill of Ottoman bakers adding New World potatoes to their bread dough. These ingredients didn't just change menus, they rewrote entire culinary identities. In Manila, vendors blended Mexican chocolate with native tuba palm wine, creating a hybrid drink that fueled both laborers and revolutionaries. Yet this fusion came at a brutal cost. Colonial powers systematically dismantled indigenous food systems, replacing them with imported cash crops. In India, British tea plantations displaced traditional millet farmers, forcing street vendors to pivot from local grains to wheat-based chapatis. Dutch control of the Spice Islands turned once ubiquitous nutmeg into a luxury item, vanishing from commoners' food stalls for generations. The most heartbreaking erasures happened in the Americas, where conquistadors banned amaranth, a sacred Aztec grain, because it featured in pagan rituals. Vendors caught selling amaranth sweets faced execution, their recipes nearly lost to history, but resilience simmered beneath oppression. Enslaved Africans in the Caribbean smuggled okra seeds in their hair, transforming it into the backbone of gumbo sold at dockside stalls. Indigenous Peruvian women hid quinoa in plain sight, mixing it with Spanish rice dishes at market stands. The Jamaican patty, now a street food icon, began as a workaround enslaved people wrapping spicy fillings in pastry to mimic English pies while preserving West African flavors. These culinary survivals reveal street food's quiet power. A single bite of Vietnamese banh mi tells of French baguettes meeting fish sauce, while South African bunny chow hollowed bread filled with curry whispers of indentured laborers repurposing colonial rations. The next time you see a taco al pastor spinning on a vertical spit, remember, it's a direct descendant of Lebanese shawarma brought by Ottoman migrants to Mexico, a globe-spanning story of adaptation served on a corn tortilla. Street vendors didn't just witness history, they preserved its flavors against all odds, turning every marketplace into an archive of resistance. The clatter of steam engines and the shrill whistle of factory shifts didn't just change how goods were made, they rewrote the rules of who got to feed the working class. As smokestacks pierced city skylines in 19th century London and Manchester, a chorus of politicians and industrialists began branding street vendors as relics of a dirty, disorderly past. Pamphlets circulated with lurid illustrations of pie sellers covered in soot, their wares allegedly teeming with mystery meat and tuberculosis. The real agenda was thinly veiled. Factory owners wanted workers tethered to company cafeterias, where meals could be served quickly and shifts shortened by precious minutes. Yet for all their power, these elites underestimated the stubborn ingenuity of the vendors they sought to erase. Amid the grime of industrial Birmingham, pie makers staged their own quiet revolution. They studied factory timetables, positioning carts at gates precisely as shifts ended, offering handheld meals that could be eaten while walking home. Some even struck deals with foremen to sell directly inside factory yards, a practice that sparked outrage among cafeteria contractors. The pies themselves evolved, too. Sturdy crusts protected fillings from airborne coal dust, while ingredients like kidney and potato stretched meat supplies further, keeping prices within reach of exhausted laborers. Census records reveal entire families clinging to survival through these microeconomies. In Leeds alone, over 300 women listed their occupation as street-based victualler, despite mounting legal harassment. The backlash against vendors wasn't really about hygiene, it was about control. When Paris redesigned its boulevards in the 1860s, broad sidewalks were deliberately built without vendor niches to modernize the city. New York's push for model markets shoved pushcarts into designated zones far from bustling immigrant neighborhoods. Yet the harder authorities pushed, the more resourceful vendors became. In Berlin, sausage sellers repurposed decommissioned railway carts as mobile kitchens, while Glasgow's Stovey's merchant selling potato and offal hash, used church basement kitchens to evade health inspectors. What these clashes reveal is a pattern still playing out today. The same arguments used against 19th century vendors, they block traffic. Their unsanitary echo in debates over modern food trucks. Yet history keeps proving their resilience. When London's textile mills collapsed, it was the pie sellers who pivoted to serving dockworkers. When American factories outsourced jobs, taco trucks followed the new industrial parks. Street food doesn't vanish. It adapts because hunger and hustle are forces no ordinance can fully extinguish. The next time you pass a construction worker buying a breakfast burrito from a cart, you're witnessing the latest chapter in an ages-old dance between power and perseverance, served hot and wrapped to go. In the pre-dawn darkness of Tenochtitlan's canals, Aztec women were already at work, grinding maize by hand, wrapping tamales in corn husks, and loading canoes with steaming baskets. These women, known as tamaleras, held a near monopoly over the city's most beloved street food, their recipes passed mother to daughter like sacred texts. Yet their dominance wasn't just tradition, it was strategy. Tamales required pre-dawn preparation, and with men expected at military training or construction crews by sunrise, women seized this temporal niche. Spanish chroniclers marveled at the sight of hundreds of canoes gliding through the city at first light, each piloted by a woman balancing her wares with one hand while paddling with the other. These vendors weren't just feeding the masses, they were the original multitaskers, blurring domestic labor and public commerce in ways that unsettled colonial authorities. Halfway across the globe in Edo period Japan, the rules flipped. Women were banned from selling noodles or grilled fish considered too public for respectable females, yet they thrived in shadow economies. Widows of samurai left destitute by clan wars famously operated ghost stalls after curfew, their faces hidden by straw hats as they sold sweet mochai to night watchmen. The most ingenious disguised themselves as men, tying back sleeves and deepening their voices to hawk buckwheat soba near temple gates. When authorities cracked down, they adapted again, employing male children as front-facing sellers while mothers cooked behind paper screens. The stakes were highest for women in the Islamic world's bustling markets. While medieval Cairo's bread trade was dominated by female bakers, their skills so vital that sultans exempted them from purdah during Ramadan, Mecca's sacred precincts barred women from selling altogether. Resourceful vendors found loopholes. In Damascus, women hired young boys to shout their wares, while in Ottoman Bursa, they sold embroidered cloth bags filled with spices, technically trading textiles rather than food. A 17th century court record from Istanbul reveals a pepper vendor named Aish who was fined for disturbing the peace with her loud cries until neighbors testified her prices fed half the neighborhood's widows. What's startling is how often these women outpaced male competitors when given even a sliver of opportunity. In Victorian London's East End, surveys showed female-run pie stalls consistently outsold men's by 3 to 1, their secret. Bigger portions for factory workers and a motherly reputation for cleanliness. Portuguese widows in Goa turned Catholic prohibitions against Hindu temple vendors to their advantage, creating a monopoly on bibinka coconut cakes sold at church festivals. Even in cultures where women couldn't handle money directly, like Qing Dynasty China, they developed silent barter systems exchanging buns for scrap fabric that could later be traded for coins through male relatives. The true measure of their impact lies in the backlash. When Mexico City attempted to modernize markets in the 1890s, requiring licenses that favored male shopkeepers, tamaleras organized the first recorded street vendor strike, paralyzing the capital until concessions were made. In Bombay, colonial health inspectors repeatedly targeted women selling vada pav, claiming their unhygienic saras contaminated food, ignoring identical practices by male vendors. Yet time and again, these women proved indispensable. During the 1877 famine in Madras, it was female millet sellers who stretched grain with wild roots and bark to keep prices low, their stalls becoming de facto relief stations. From the Tamilaras to the night witches of Edo, these women didn't just challenge norms, they rewrote the rules of urban survival. Their legacy lingers in every woman who rolls dough before sunrise, every mother who turns a sidewalk into a school tuition fund, every widow who refuses to let hunger win. The next time you bite into a street food dish wrapped in leaves or paper, remember, those folds might just hold generations of quiet rebellion. Behind the sizzle of ancient grills and the cheerful cries of market vendors lurked a grim reality. Countless cooks and servers weren't free entrepreneurs but enslaved laborers bound to their stalls. In Rome's bustling forums, pastry makers worked with iron shackles around their ankles, their delicate honey cakes and fruit tarts prepared under the watchful eyes of wealthy owners who pocketed every coin. These enslaved vendors weren't exceptions. They were the backbone of street food economies from Athens to Antioch. Archaeologists have uncovered chilling evidence: millstones with shackle rings still attached in Austria's bakeries, and frescoes in Pompeii depicting young children turning spits over open flames, their faces streaked with soot. The exploitation wasn't limited to slavery. Indentured workers in medieval Europe faced brutal conditions, bound to vendors through crushing debt. In London's 14th century pie trade, apprentices as young as 7 signed contracts that effectively trapped them for decades, their wages withheld under the guise of training. Tax records from Paris reveal street kitchens where entire families labored 18-hour days to repay loans for their carts and ingredients, their debts sometimes stretching across generations. Even in cultures without formal slavery, like Edo, Japan, orphan children were leased to noodle vendors in exchange for meager food and shelter, their tiny hands scarred from boiling water and sharp knives. What makes this history so unsettling is how it echoes modern struggles. The Roman pastry chef chained to his stall shares haunting parallels with today's gig workers, locked into algorithm-controlled delivery apps that dictate their earnings down to the minute. The child laborers turning skewers in Pompeii's Thermopolia mirror the undocumented teens working midnight shifts in urban food trucks, their pay kept off the books. Street food's romanticized image often glosses over these raw truths, that for every vendor who climbed from poverty to prosperity, countless others were ground down by systems designed to profit from their labor. Yet even in these shadows, resilience flickered. Runaway slaves in Constantinople famously established secret midnight markets, trading stolen kitchen scraps for freedom papers. Indentured bakers in medieval York formed covert alliances, hiding portions of dough to bake rebellion loaves for the hungry. The darker the history, the brighter these acts of defiance shine, proof that the spirit of street food was never just about sustenance, but survival against all odds. The next time you bite into a golden empanada or crispy falafel, remember, its flavor carries not just spice, but the weight of centuries of struggle, ingenuity, and quiet rebellion. The challenge of keeping food from spoiling in the ancient world wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a matter of survival. Street vendors became accidental chemists, mastering preservation techniques that turned perishable ingredients into durable commodities. Take garum, that pungent Roman fish sauce. What began as a clever way to use up scraps evolved into a preservation powerhouse. Fishermen would layer small fish like sardines with salt in giant vats, then leave them to ferment under the Mediterranean sun for months. The resulting liquid wasn't just flavorful, Its extreme salinity created an environment where harmful bacteria couldn't survive. Archaeologists have found garum containers in shipwrecks still sealed after 2,000 years, their contents remarkably intact, proof of this method's astonishing effectiveness. But fish sauce was just one tool in an ancient arsenal of food preservation. In Northern Europe, where sunlight was scarce, vendors perfected smoking techniques that did double duty, preserving meats while adding rich, complex flavors. A Viking Age market stall in Hedeby would have featured racks of herring slowly cured over smoldering juniper wood, their flesh transformed into durable protein packets that could last through winter. The same principle applied from the Baltic to the Black Sea, where Slavic vendors hung sausages in chimney alcoves, letting constant smoke exposure create edible armor against spoilage. Drying represented another universal solution, adapted to local climates with remarkable ingenuity. Along the Nile, vendors sliced fruits paper thin and placed them on reed mats atop hot sand, harnessing the desert's natural dehydrating power. Chinese street cooks in the Tang Dynasty suspended duck carcasses in bamboo towers where mountain winds accelerated the drying process, creating that iconic preserved duck still prized today. Even moisture-rich ingredients weren't safe from this treatment. Peruvian potato vendors in the Andes developed chuño, freeze-drying tubers by alternating frosty nights with intense daytime sun, producing lightweight, shelf-stable starch that could last for years. Fermentation emerged as the most transformative technique of all, turning potential waste into coveted delicacies. Korean street vendors buried earthenware jars of kimchi underground, letting winter-ground temperatures regulate the slow fermentation that preserved vegetables while boosting their nutritional value. In Ethiopia, teff flour mixed with water became injera bread through natural fermentation, its sourdough-like properties preventing mold in tropical climates. The real brilliance lay in how these methods often improved the original ingredients. Roman garum developed umami depth over time, just as aged Korean kimchi gained complexity no fresh vegetable could match. What made these innovations truly revolutionary was their ripple effect on urban life. When a vendor in Pompeii could offer preserved olives from Hispania or smoked cheese from the Alps, it transformed local diets and expanded culinary horizons. The Silk Road flourished not just because of spices and silk, but because smoked meats and dried fruits could survive the journey. These preservation techniques didn't just prevent hunger, they built the foundation for global trade, cultural exchange, and the very idea that food could transcend seasons and geography. Next time you enjoy prosciutto or pickles from a street vendor, remember, you're tasting the legacy of ancient problem solvers who turned necessity into the mother of delicious invention. When the Bastille fell in 1789, it wasn't just revolutionaries storming the fortress, it was hunger. Parisian bread vendors, pushed to the brink by skyrocketing flour prices, had spent months whispering to their customers about royal grain hoarding, their stalls becoming hotbeds of discontent. The same hands that kneaded dough by dawn now passed clandestine pamphlets under loaves, their flour-dusted aprons hiding smuggled weapons. Authorities knew the danger. In France, bread wasn't just food, it was a social contract. When Queen Marie Antoinette allegedly dismissed shortages with "let them eat cake," she wasn't just out of touch, she'd ignored the street vendors who acted as the city's pulse, their prices a barometer of the people's rage. Across the Atlantic in Haiti, street food vendors played an even more daring role in rebellion. Enslaved women selling Akassan corn porridge at plantation markets used their mobility to pass intelligence between rebel factions, hiding coded messages in the hollow handles of their ladles. When the revolution erupted in 1791, these vendors transformed their stalls into supply depots, feeding guerrilla fighters while distracting French soldiers with spiked drinks. A tactic echoed centuries later during India's independence movement, where chai wallahs near British barracks laced their brews with laxatives to weaken colonial troops. The British learned the hard way that controlling street food meant controlling dissent. After banning public gatherings in Calcutta, they failed to account for the city's ubiquitous fuchka vendors, their carts serving as mobile meeting points for nationalists. The crunch of fried dough balls masked whispered plans, while the tangy tamarind water disguised secret ink used for protest posters. One police report from 1930 even noted how vendors near university gates altered their spice levels to signal raid warnings, mild for safety, fiery for danger. What made these vendors so effective was their invisibility to power. A noodle seller in colonial Singapore could eavesdrop on British officers' conversations while refilling bowls, just as tamale vendors in Mexican plazas during the Revolution overheard federales boasting about troop movements. Their very mundanity became a weapon. When Chilean dictator Pinochet's forces raided Santiago markets in the 1970s, they overlooked the elderly women selling empanadas, never realizing those folded pastries concealed underground newspapers. The ultimate irony, many revolutionary street foods outlasted the regimes they helped topple. The same Haitian acasson that fueled rebellion is now a national comfort food. Parisian bakers still make revolution bread with rougher flour as a quiet tribute, and in Delhi, the fuchka stands that once plotted against the British are today crammed with teenagers sharing gossip, unaware they're sitting at the same counters where history was secretly made. Street vendors didn't just feed revolutions, they preserved their flavors, turning every bite into a taste of defiance. Walk through any major city today, and you'll spot the same neon signs, golden arches, coffee cups with green mermaids, burger chains stamped on every corner. It's a culinary colonization where ancient recipes honed over centuries are vanishing beneath the weight of mass-produced sameness. The sizzle of handmade dumplings in Bangkok's alleys is drowned out by the microwave ping of factory-frozen spring rolls. The aroma of charcoal-grilled anticachos in Lima competes with the sterile scent of conveyor belt chicken nuggets. This isn't just about losing flavors, it's about erasing living history, one standardized menu at a time. Yet beneath this homogenizing tide, resistance simmers. In Italy's Piedmont region, the slow food movement began as a literal sit-in, protesters sharing bowls of handmade pasta on the steps of a McDonald's construction site. What started as defiance has blossomed into a global network preserving street food traditions from Mexico's tamaleras to Mumbai's vada pav masters, their weapon. The radical idea that a grandmother's recipe for fermented fish sauce or a roasted cassava cake holds as much cultural value as any UNESCO monument. The battle lines are drawn in unexpected places. Seoul's Gwangjang market, where ajumas have rolled mung bean pancakes since the Korean War, now faces pressure to modernize with automated fryers. Osaka's Tilayuda vendors, whose blue corn tortillas have fed generations, are pushed out by glossy taco chains bankrolled by foreign investors. Even the humblest dishes aren't safe when a multinational corporation trademarked India's traditional Bombay sandwich. Street cooks suddenly found themselves legally barred from making their own ancestors' recipes. But the fight back is as ingenious as the vendors themselves. In Marrakech, a cooperative teaches young women to document their mother's spice blends as intellectual property. Tokyo's last remaining yatai food carts formed a union, negotiating with city planners to protect their sidewalk territories. Most powerfully, consumers are voting with their wallets. When Portugal's iconic bifana sandwich was nearly replaced by pre-packaged versions, a viral campaign urging locals to eat at the bald guy's cart saved an entire block of family-run stalls. The stakes go deeper than nostalgia. Studies in food anthropology reveal how street vendors act as living archives, the precise way a Senegalese thiacri seller folds millet and yogurt encodes West African climate patterns, just as the thickness of a Sicilian arancina's crust reflects centuries of Arab-Norman trade. Lose these nuances to industrial uniformity, and we sever threads connecting us to ecological wisdom, migration routes, even lost languages whispered over shared meals. Perhaps the ultimate irony, corporations now scramble to fake the authenticity they erased. Fast food giants hire flavor anthropologists to replicate street food textures, while supermarket freezer aisles boast artisanal dumplings stripped of their context. The real hope lies in the vendors who refuse to be romanticized into extinction, the woman in Hanoi who still pounds her green papaya salad by hand, the Mexico City tlacoyo maker grinding heirloom corn on volcanic stone. Their persistence proves that taste memory is stronger than any marketing budget. The next time you're torn between a convenience store onigiri and one wrapped in bamboo by a wizened obasan, remember, you're not just choosing a snack, but casting a vote for who gets to write the next chapter of human flavor. The sizzle of a Korean-Mexican fusion taco truck in Los Angeles or the hypnotic swirl of a Taiwanese bubble tea stall might feel like modern phenomena, but their DNA traces straight back to the Silk Road spice traders and Roman Thermopolia cooks. Today's gourmet food trucks with artisanal branding and Instagrammable plating, they're just the latest iteration of a 10,000-year-old tradition, hustlers turning sidewalk corners into culinary stages. What's fascinating isn't just the continuity, but how ancient street vendor strategies have colonized the digital age. That viral TikTok of a Bangkok auntie flawlessly flipping mango sticky rice. It's the 21st century version of a medieval baker shouting his wares in a town square, both performances designed to lure customers through spectacle and skill. Take the rise of night markets from Taipei to Austin, their neon-lit chaos where stinky tofu collides with lobster rolls mirrors the sensory overload of Constantinople's medieval markets or Edo period Japan's yatai stalls. The same principles apply. Clustering vendors creates a gravitational pull of crowds, limited time offerings fuel urgency, and communal seating breaks social barriers. Even the pricing psychology is ancient. That 5 for $10 deal on dumplings, a direct descendant of Pompeii's buy 9 loaves, get the 10th free, scratches found on Thermopolium walls. But the real revolution is in storytelling. Ancient vendors relied on word of mouth and the occasional poet's ode. Today's street food stars algorithmically weaponize nostalgia. A Mexican elotero in Chicago films his cart steam rising against skyscrapers, tapping into migrant memories. A third-generation Jianbing seller in Shanghai live streams her crepe making to millions, turning a breakfast staple into performance art. These aren't just sales tactics, they're cultural preservation. When a Senegalese Thieboudian vendor in Paris posts cooking reels, she's not just feeding customers but teaching a diaspora how to taste home. The dark side, gentrification's double-edged knife. What starts as authentic, say, Oaxacan memelas sold from a grandmother's komel, gets branded as artisanal and marked up 400% in trendy food halls. The same working-class foods once mocked as peasant fare now get fetishized by foodies, often pushing original vendors out of neighborhoods they sustained for decades. Yet even here, ancient survival tactics resurface. Los Angeles Boyle Heights vendors formed coalitions to resist rent hikes, echoing medieval guilds. Bangkok's motorcycle sidewalk chefs play cat and mouse with police like their ancestors dodged tax collectors. What endures is the alchemy of adaptability. The halal cart guy in New York who adds sriracha to his white sauce. He's channeling the same instinct as the Silk Road vendor who tweaked kebab spices for passing caravans. The vegan jackfruit tacos gaining traction globally, a modern twist on the Buddhist mock meats Buddhist temple vendors perfected 1,000 years ago. Street food has always been the people's culinary laboratory, democratic, disruptive, and deliciously unpredictable. The next time you swipe past a mukbang video or join a midnight food truck rally, remember, you're not just consuming content or calories, but participating in history's longest-running dinner party, one where everyone, for a few bites at least, gets a seat at the table. From the smoky grills of ancient Rome to the vibrant night markets of modern-day Bangkok, street vendors have always been the heartbeat of urban life, feeding not just bodies but the very soul of civilization. Think about it, every time you grab a hot dog at a baseball game or savor a steaming empanada from a sidewalk cart, you're participating in a ritual as old as cities themselves. Those quick, flavorful bites connect us across millennia, to workers huddled around a Mesopotamian grain seller's stall, to medieval scholars debating philosophy over shared bowls of stew, to revolutionaries whispering plans between sips of spiced tea. Street food isn't just convenient, it's a living archive of human ingenuity, resilience, and community. Consider the taco al pastor spinning on its vertical spit, a direct descendant of Lebanese shawarma brought to Mexico by Ottoman immigrants. Or the giant Bing crepe sizzling on a Beijing street corner, its thin batter echoing the portable pancakes Roman soldiers carried into battle. These flavors didn't just survive, they evolved, adapted, and thrived because street vendors have always been master alchemists, turning scarcity into abundance, foreign ingredients into local treasures, and simple meals into cultural icons. That's why a bite of banh mi tastes like French colonialism and Vietnamese resilience folded into a single baguette, or why a scoop of gelato carries the whispers of Renaissance Florence's sorbetto vendors. But here's the real magic: street food democratizes delight. It doesn't matter if you're a CEO or a construction worker. When you're standing in line for $1 falafel or a paper cone of piping hot churros, you're equal. That's a tradition as ancient as the Aztec tamaleras selling steaming corn bundles to nobles and laborers alike, or the Edo period noodle slingers who fed both samurai and silk merchants. In a world obsessed with exclusivity, street food remains gloriously, stubbornly inclusive. So the next time you unwrap a greasy kebab at midnight or lick mango juice off your fingers at a summer festival, pause for a second. You're not just eating, you're stepping into a story that stretches back to the first cities, where someone, somewhere, figured out how to turn fire, flour, and fearless hustle into a livelihood. Hit the comments and tell us, what's the street food that tastes like home to you? And if you've ever had a meal that made you feel like you were biting into history, we'd love to hear that too. Don't forget to subscribe. We've got plenty more flavors of the past to explore together. Until then, keep savoring the world, one sidewalk snack at a time.